Welcome back to perhaps our biggest and most important edition of the CNC on CFB show ever. Uh, we're talking Bowl Mania, we're talking the
hmm
college football playoff, the selections, the committee, and we're talking about conference championship weekend.
That we are. And just very I think everything went according to plan, right? Everyone saw it
Yep.
coming, no controversy whatsoever, just smooth sailing. So just really nothing to talk
I said it
about.
a couple weeks ago. I said these games are all going to work themselves out. The committee's not even going to have to make a tough decision.
Nope,
I
not
called it.
not in the slightest. Not in the slightest at all. But I think look with that, let's just start pulling up the recap of championship weekend and just kind of throw in our best bets, some ball and notable storylines, just as we're talking about what we saw happen. So let's do this.
Mm-hmm.
Kicking off our Friday slate con, we saw one of, if not the heavyweight, the matchup that we thought was going to be the best game. Definitely lived up to some hype. Tough to see in that scenario teams when you got to get a stop and you don't get a stop. I want to know any analytic or people that are tracking this in that scenario where the team has to get a stop. It feels like you could be the worst running team in the country. Somehow people just find a way to get the first down that they need when it matters most.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, this game the results surprised me a little, although as I said on last week's episode, I couldn't even make a pick on this. I thought it was so close to a
You
fifty-fifty
did,
matchup.
you did.
Um, but I didn't think we'd see a scenario like that where Oregon's defense, they didn't even really have to make like a three and out stop. They just had to stop Washington from matriculating the ball, chewing clock,
hmm
and
hmm
I thought they would be able to do it if they got into a situation like that. They've been the best defense in the Pac-12 this year, and Washington's offense, as star-studded as it is, has looked pedestrian at times. But when the game was on the line, Washington just did what they had to do, and like you said, they just chunked up the field, first down, run that clock down, win the
hmm
game.
hmm Yep, and just a shame, I guess, to see Bo Nix not quite get that opportunity to go out on his terms. He is going to play in the Holiday Bowl, or they no, that's actually what USC is in. Now, bowl talk aside, but Bo Nix, what a career for him. Still not over just yet. He's going to extend, I guess, the that game started record. He's just kind of building upon that his body of work and his resume as in these history books. Just tough to see. Yeah, tough to see him not get that chance. But Washington wins the Pac-12 undefeated. Pretty much book their ticket. Obviously, after that win on Friday night. Um, any closing thoughts, Con, on either team before we transition into the next biggest, closest game, or the biggest, arguably?
Yeah, I think my closing thought on Washington here is probably going into this game, I would have told you, even if they win, I don't think they have a chance to really do anything in the college football playoff, just
hmm
because they had looked so shaky at times this year.
Yeah.
But watching them go out there and beat still, I think, one of the best five, six, seven teams in the country,
hmm
and really, like we talked about, kind of control the clock, control the momentum of the game. It made me think they got a chance here.
Yeah. They know. I hedged my Oregon future on Friday, and yeah, Oregon. I got at the time. Oregon was about 9-1.
Hmm.
Talking about best bets and really subpoor, lackluster betting records. Maybe a future ends up bailing me
Oh,
out on the year, but talk about Oregon 9-1. I got them a couple weeks ago,
hmm
9-1, and then heading into Friday night. I mean, it was pretty much. I think Oregon was like minus 390 to make the playoff for some of the
hmm
odds. It was crazy odds. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to hedge. And like we've been talking about, the theme was I was like, oh, Big Ten or Pac 12. I feel like that's where the winner's going to
hmm
ultimately come out of. But just to hedge my Oregon, I got Washington at 25-1 to win the CFP. So I'm liking, and after what we've seen shake out, like you're saying, it's kind of wide open. It's kind of wide open.
hmm
Um, we'll preview the games obviously in much more detail here in future shows and episodes. But Washington, they just find ways to win. They're finding ways to win, and not the maybe don't have the most trust, but time and time again, they're figuring out ways to do it, and just should be a good, obviously, bowl January 1st, as it always has been in these top four college football playoff semifinals. We will see. We will see, but we
Yeah.
will have plenty of time to
And
discuss.
one more point I will make on that. You talk about finding ways to win. We've talked about it all year with this team.
Hmm.
And what I have said on multiple occasions is I just want the day where the offense and the defense both show up because they won some really low scoring games where they played great
Yep.
defense. They won some shootouts where they played great offense. It didn't feel like they were doing both. This game, we almost got a hybrid. The story of the game in the first half was Washington shutting down Oregon's offense. Then in the second half, we've talked about how Washington's offense was able to, eat that clock, matriculate the ball. The
Hmm.
other side of it was Oregon's defense would get the ball and just score in two plays.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I mean, to even that, I mean, it was unbelievable. The quick fire to former Alabama player, Trayshawn Holden,
mhm.
to just, yeah, how that, well, it's kind of perplexing. But then again, they're undefeated Pac 12 champs, and rightfully so, they got in. I guess we'll talk about maybe other rightfully or rightfully not so a little bit here. But
Yeah.
I think moving on
But
to,
before we do, Washington, I have a new challenge for you. All
okay,
season I've been
okay.
saying the defense and the offense need to show up on the same day. I don't think I was clear enough. From now on, the challenge is the defense and the offense have to both show up for 60 minutes on one game, and you might be the best team in the country.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. Challenge right here on the CNC on CFB show. You guys heard it over there in Seattle as you prepare to take on the Texas Longhorns. But speaking of a team that faced the Texas Longhorns and lost, but now will be able to face the Michigan Wolverines, Alabama, completely making my best bet look silly. Con looking silly with when I had Georgia minus 5.5 there. I look credit to Alabama and Jalen Milroe, Nick Saban. I mean, really the defense stepping up, and in Atlanta, Alabama pulls off an upset. I really didn't think they had in them, especially after what we just saw in the rivalry week against an Auburn team that got pretty much just dominated by New Mexico State.
Yeah.
I mean, just a wild. I mean, college football, it's a wild landscape week to week, and just credit to where it belongs to that Alabama program beating Georgia.
Yeah. My takeaway from this game was, and maybe I'm reading too much into it, but it certainly looked to me like Georgia came out playing and coaching scared. Like they were just playing not to lose instead of playing to win, which I didn't think I'd see. Two-time
Yeah.
defending national champs, undefeated through the regular season this
Hmm.
year. I was with you. I thought they'd come out and say, "Hey, by the way, we're number one for a reason,"
Hmm.
and it really felt like they were playing to not make the big mistake rather than playing to just go out and dominate.
You know, that's absolutely right, and I think look with how the game started. Uh, Hold Bama, force a punt, and
Yep.
then you go down and score a touchdown on your drive to open the game. It just yeah, could not have seen what then succeeded in a lackluster non-Georgia effort and what we've been used to seeing, and
Yeah.
and them rising to the occasion, excuse me, in these big moments. Although they did. I mean, there was a couple years ago they did lose to Bama in the SC title game, and then they got their revenge in the playoff. But they just don't get that opportunity this year,
Nope.
and I think they're definitely I think going to be a favorite next
Oh,
season when it
yeah.
rolls around. But yeah, Carson Beck, we'll see what he can build upon this year. A lot of speculation talking about transfers, all this or that. All signs point to him coming back. You're going to be without maybe a Brock Bowers, but just a tough season pill to swallow for Georgia after
Mhm.
how dominant they've their run here these last couple of years. But man, it's going to be entertaining seeing Bama though get in the playoff. And I feel like with Nick Saban, look, anything talking about if there's a guy that's going to have his team up for it and has been battle tested, has the experience. I mean, it's just going to be very, very interesting. And talking about Vegas lines, it already indicates, I think, as much. 0-1-4 matchup, team that was really the eighth, according to the committee, eighth best team going into that game. But I very impressed by Bama. They won the game. I think they won the game instead of Georgia just flat out losing the game. They
Hmm.
were the better team, and I think Alabama just. I'm just not gonna. I can't bet against them now. They're dumb. If there's anything I know from this Bama team after this weekend, it's not to bet against them. Not to bet against them. But speaking of their CFP opponent, Michigan,
Yep.
at least one of my kind of a co-best bet hit there. I think it might have been, was that the, that wasn't, no, that wasn't the gut off. It wasn't the gut off, but it was, we were kind of, I feel like, in opposing corners. You thought
Yep.
maybe Iowa, they got the good defense. If there was a game, maybe if they just got to put 8 point or two out there. But
This is almost exactly what I predicted too. I said like Michigan's too good, but Iowa's defense is going to give them fits, and I think I said like they could win this 28-7, 28-10. They won it 26-0. I was pretty good on the Michigan number.
yeah.
I thought maybe a fumble return or something.
Iowa just doesn't have, I mean, they shouldn't have fired their OC.
Yeah.
They could have, at least was getting them, in the teens in terms of scoring. But yeah, I mean, just I really, I don't have too much take away from that for Michigan. I mean, we see how good they are, the rightful number one with what played out going into the playoff season, and yeah, with Harbaugh back, and yeah, you can see the defense, you can see the offense. I mean, again, it's like JJ McCarthy. It's like not a lot's really needed of him with how good they are out everywhere else, but it's gonna be such an intriguing matchup when they do face off against Bama. Um, I don't, yeah, Iowa. I mean, it's basically we just talk about. There's just one team to talk about from this game,
Yep.
and just shout out to Michigan for taking care of business. Credit where credit's due.
Yeah, and I'll also say if anyone's worried about what they saw out of the Michigan offense or anything, I think this is a classic example of like the two games we saw leading into the Ohio State game where they were
Mhm.
just saying, we can win this without doing anything special. We're not going to put anything on tape that we want to save for a big game. So,
Yeah,
yeah, that game doesn't concern me.
nope, not at all. And speaking of rounding out the some college football playoff relevant games, ACC title, a Florida State team kind of just limped by and beat a top 15 ranked Louisville team, but man, Louisville, I mean, I just expected a lot more. Look, I had them as, I had some conviction in them and Louisville pulling an upset, quote, so to speak, but I didn't really think it was going to be an upset given the complexion of the game, down to your third string quarterback. And I just thought, you know, not that Jack Plummer is a top five, a top five quarterback in college football by any means, but experienced guy coming, you've been a lot of experience with him and the coach, and I just expected a lot more out of Louisville. But Florida State played what was in front of them, and they got a win, and they did what all they could. They did all they could. I think
And
is,
we'll
is a way
get
to
into
put it.
that.
We'll get into that.
But I will say from this, Louisville was a good team. All of a sudden, I think the narrative has become
I
like
see where, yeah.
Louisville's this horrible, dreadful team. Can't believe they even got into the ACC championship game.
Hmm.
They finished the season 10-3. They were 10-2 going into this game, and they were able to score throughout the season. And Florida State totally shut down their offense, which is like that's good football. I think
Yeah,
there's so much
I see what you're saying.
heaped on how
How good
how
you will, yeah.
just how rough the offense looked that everyone was like, Florida State stinks, so does Louisville. This
Hmm.
game was terrible. Well, it may not have been the most aesthetically pleasing game, but to shut down the 14 ranked team in the country completely on offense, that is good football still.
Hmm. No, it absolutely is, and I think, yeah, in fairness, it's just, yeah. So a bit to your point, a bit too reactionary or sensationalist about how bad Louisville is. Oh, how Florida State didn't look this well, but it was a top 15 team. Top 15 team. It was a team that got some big wins and looked good. Surprise team in Louisville, but yeah, we will get into a lot more detail shortly, about the exact some situations that kind of transpired, some choices that were made by some people with some power. But rounding out, I think what we just saw in the conference championship weekend, Texas, your best bet, really took care of business. Was never close. I mean, just churned out touchdown after touchdown after touchdown. My ballin' goes to Quinn Ewers. I mean, setting records in that game. Obviously, credit to where it's due. That whole weapons around him. Texas is a dangerous team. They are a
Yeah.
dangerous team, and Oklahoma State just didn't capitalize. Wasn't quite good enough.
Yeah, and I think, this is a sport where, probably because it's the sport that has the most debate in it because of the way that the playoff is decided and all that,
Mm-hmm.
there's constant debate throughout the entire regular season. And so you hear the term recency bias thrown around more
Yeah.
often in college football discourse than any other sport.
Mm-hmm.
And the last 2 weeks, they've looked so good that I think there may be a little bit of recency bias around this team. Now, I
Yeah.
loved them. I had them as my best bet. I
Mm-hmm.
thought they were much better than
Mm-hmm.
Oklahoma State, and they were. And I think they deserve to be in the playoff, and they are. But they've also not looked like this Texas team a fair amount of times this year. So I think anyone who's going, oh, look at what they're doing. 49 points this game, 57 points last game. They're going to steamroll through the playoff. I would say hold your horses on that a little bit.
Uh-huh. No, I 100% I agree with that. But to their point, they're putting a great product out there,
And
and
this is the time of year to be peaking.
that's exactly right. And the time of the year not to be not peaking, to not this is the time to limp by through games, which is a theme I guess we will touch on. Yeah, these games were played. No real significance. Not like there was a ranking or a Final Four or any of that. That was just made after these games were played. But yeah, that's the recap for conference title weekend. Let's segue into a question that you have and just some overall commentary on what to make of a top six, really top five ranking. Wonder what that ranking's going to be. Top five transfer portal quarterbacks, top five coaches. We'll see you guys in a second.
Welcome back to the show. Now we get into the nitty gritty, the part that everyone wants to talk about, the part you've probably all been waiting for. Connor's questions, of course.
Mm-hmm. Of course, of course, of course.
But no, this question will be relevant to the upcoming discussion we're going to have about these college football playoff rankings and selections. So I'm just going to kick it to you right now, Colin. Head-to-head games don't matter. Conference championships don't matter. Records don't matter. Just based on what you've watched this year, we've both watched so much college football. Who do you think right now are the four best teams in all of college football?
Sure. So, gotta go in kind of the DMV area. I think Liberty, JMU. No, jokes aside, especially jokes aside for those programs, phenomenal years for both Liberty and JMU. But I think, yeah, look, for me, we only have two conferences represented. I'm going down south to the SEC title game that we just saw.
Mm-hmm.
I think, look, Georgia, they're absolutely a top four team. Just unfortunate. Even being ranked one heading into it just wasn't enough with obviously other circumstances out of their control. But I think Georgia is absolutely one of the top four teams in the country. And I think Bama is as well. I think, look, it works with Miller at quarterback. It works. They've found ways to make it work, and they've shown, I think, enough good, in my view, from as a complete team that can really, I think, compete versus any team as they just showed, and rounding out the other two teams, I think that are in my view, best four teams in the country. I think Michigan and Ohio State are in that as well. And Michigan, we talked about complete teams. I really think they are right up there, and it sucks they had to play in the same conference in the same division and couldn't see each other in a conference title bout like we just saw with Bama and Georgia. But I really think, look, Ohio State, they had a chance, and it was close. It was a game of inches, game of margins, and just enough space for an interception to be made to prevent who knows what happens with the time remaining, what could have gone in that rivalry. rivalry week in Ann Arbor there.
Mm-hmm.
I think, talk about both sides of the ball, Michigan and Ohio State, I think they showed that they are two of the top four teams. And who I left out, I no Pac-12 teams, no Washington, no Oregon. I just think I don't trust in them or view them as much as a complete bona fide top four team as the four I just mentioned. But look, we talked about with Washington, they keep proving people wrong, and they got chips on their shoulders. And I don't want to be betting against them as I've bet for Washington recently, but no Pac-12 represented here, no Big 12 with Texas. I mean, Texas, look, they did beat Alabama, and like to your point, but you said no, we're just throwing everything out the window in isolation. In isolation,
who you think the best four teams
in
are?
Yep.
So that's who you have. You have Michigan, Ohio State, Alabama, and Georgia.
Yep.
All right. I have Michigan in there as well. I have Georgia in there as well. I have Ohio State in there as well.
Okay.
And I have Texas in there. I think that all four of those teams are better than Bama. Just Bama's struggles, the Auburn game, the Arkansas game, they just haven't looked like a true bona fide Bama to me. Now, they just beat Georgia, but I think the top 9 or 10 teams in the country, again, not by 9 or 10 on the rankings, but who I think are the top 9 or 10 best teams in the country, any of them could beat any of them week to week. We're talking about a marginal difference between top 4 and 5th best team or whatever.
Sure.
But, so that was, we each had 2 teams not in the top 4 in our personal top 4s, which I think segues perfectly into what the hell is the committee's job? Because there's so much of it this week that anyone arguing Florida State shouldn't be in, they would say, well, it's not about putting the 4 most deserving teams in. It's about putting the 4 best teams in. And what I posed to you in a separate conversation we just happened to get into, before, not on the microphone, was if it's about putting the 4 best teams in, why in the world is Georgia not in? I guarantee you everyone on that committee believes that Georgia is better than Washington and Texas. I would bet a lot of money on that. If not all of them, certainly more than half of them. And anyone I've talked to college football with since these rankings have come out have said, well, yeah, Georgia's one of the 4 best teams, but they just lost in the conference championship.
Yes. Which, I mean, talking about their job, talking about the role they played, how they wait there. I mean, I think, and to your point, absolutely. We both see it that way, and I think most people absolutely see it that way. They were the number 1 ranked team for the good part of the season. If not, they're at worst, they were 2. What it boils down to, I think, is it is the least offensive for them. They out of scorched earth, kind of house on fire calls they could have made. Seeing with watching it with their eyes, Florida State, the quarterback, and I think a theme. Before I get any further, the theme is timing is everything. I think talk about recency bias. Timing really is everything, and omitting Florida State as a 13-0 conference championship, conference Power 5 champion, and opting instead for Bama, effectively. And that's as controversial as they could have, I think, reasonably gotten in their minds. I don't think look, let's think about it this way. If they had gone, I mean, and this is relative to our top 4, how we view it. Imagine if they omitted Washington. I think naturally they would have to just omit Texas in this scenario. Because, I mean, after all, 3 and 4 are Texas and Bama. So you would think, okay, if Georgia, Georgia on the outside looking in, it would become down to Bama or Texas. But in terms of to your point, what you see with your eyes, who are the best teams? If you want to say who are the best teams, number 2 is the number 2 ranked team a top with what you see with your eyes. Are they truly a top 4 team? Like you're saying, they haven't really put single game together where it's, oh my God, a complete team, as the teams that we've
Mhm.
described, two of which aren't in the playoff. And it's,
I mean,
I
really, and we'll get into how you think that it should be done. Best for, most deserving for,
mhm.
some hybrid of the two or whatever. But what I wish more than, I mean, I'll say, I wish they just went with the most deserving because that's how sports work. But we'll have that debate because I know that you will push back on it. What I wish even more than that is I wish the committee would just come out and be honest and not be like, "Oh, Florida State's at 5." They don't think Florida State's better than Georgia. There's as currently
To your
constructed
point,
without.
yeah,
They don't. They probably don't think they're in the top 10 right now based on the two games they've seen them play without Jordan Travis. But so that's what I mean. Not that it would change the four teams who are in it all, but just have them come out and say, not be like, oh, it was such a tough decision because Florida State's so deserving, but this and
yeah,
that, and
not fence it every,
you know what? We don't think they're good. We don't even think they should be on this graphic of the top six. We don't think that they should be, and that's why they're not in. Rather than trying to do the cushion it the way
as
they did.
political as it can
Yeah,
be, and trying to appease every, trying to
yeah.
say, oh, every,
And then there would still be people very upset, but at least, I think it would kind of tame down any non-Florida State fans. All the Florida State fans are going to be furious about this forever, regardless of what you do.
yeah,
There are a lot of non-Florida State fans being like, you think they're good enough to be fifth, but they can't be fourth, even though they did go undefeated? If the committee just came out and said, we don't even think they're fifth, or sixth, or seventh. We think they're like the 12th best team in the country, and we're just not going to put the 12th best team in.
yeah, and part of me, I think it begs, as we're talking through this, begs the question: why not dating back, I guess, several weeks now with Florida State's ranking? Why not have them lower going? Because if
Yeah.
you could have foreseen obviously what we just saw this weekend, how the game's playing out, how they did, the Bama, yeah, obviously the Bama
Mm-hmm.
upset really putting a wrench in things. You see how it could have very well played out,
Mm-hmm.
and if you ultimately are gonna, in the event that it did absolutely
Yeah.
how it did, you were in your mind you could have foreseen, okay, well, we're gonna ultimately have to pick the best four teams, not the most deserving. What
Mm-hmm.
you've said, consistently, I guess. How, yeah, the optics of how they were within the top four going into it, and then are on the outskirts. Not to directly their own fault, as you can say, because
Mm-hmm.
they played what was in front of them. They won the games. Just at that, yeah. As soon as Jordan Travis went down with injury, and maybe the game directly
Mm-hmm.
after that. So I guess after after the Florida rivalry game,
Mm-hmm.
you could have argued, I think, look, let's,
And yeah, you make a salient point because now Florida State fans are going, wait. Texas and Alabama both jump us for winning their conference championship game, but we also won our conference championship game.
yeah,
If they had gone into the weekend saying, their last rankings going into this past weekend saying, yeah, Florida State's behind Bama and Texas in our minds. They're like 10th, then Florida State fans, yeah, they would still be very upset again, but they would know going in like, hey, they don't believe in us without this quarterback. Now, I think a lot of people were shocked by that decision because they were like, yeah, Florida State's ranked ahead of Bama and Texas. All three of them won their conference championship game. They got to stay ranked ahead of them.
yeah. I mean, even honestly looking at it this way, and like we've talked about, we both had Ohio State in our top four teams.
Mm-hmm.
If you had just dropped Ohio State after the rivalry week,
Mm-hmm.
you drop them down to like four, and you put it. Obviously, there's the potential
Mm-hmm.
for very well to obviously leapfrog a team that's not even going to be playing
Yeah.
in conference championship weekend. It's just, yeah, the committee. It's, you can't really feel bad for them because they could have. I mean, any way you slice it, it was within. Look, they were going to obviously be a bad guy in some way, shape, or form, but looking at it over the course of several weeks now, it's just, you set yourself up for this complete scorched earth.
Yep. And yeah, I think now is a good time to transition into. Now they claim they put their job is to put the four best teams in their opinion in.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe that they did that. As I said earlier, I believe they think Georgia's one of the four best teams in the
Oh
country,
yeah. Oh yeah.
but they didn't have the guts to actually do it. Which I think is lame. If the whole point of the committee, which is what they tell us, it's not about who deserves it most. It's not about who has the most accolades going into the game, the best record. It's about who we think are the four best. Then grow a pair and put the four best you think are in it. But regardless, what they tell us is that it's the four best teams every year in their opinion. They're telling us they believe those are the four best teams in the country that they put in.
Mm-hmm.
The counter argument is that, people are saying, have said for years with this whole decision process, it shouldn't be the four best, it should be the four most deserving, just like every other sport in the world, where if you go undefeated and win your division, you get to play in the playoffs, and someone who has a worse record than you can't get in over you just because a room full of guys thinks they would beat you.
Yeah. Yeah. No. I mean, it's fair enough, and that's. I mean, that's. I get that. It's not fair. It's not fair to Florida State. It isn't. But it's like I guess with how the system's constructed, with you have it's all down to very subjective
Mm-hmm.
analysis ultimately by these people who. It's funny because I saw a good, R.I.P. Mike Leach, a pretty
Yes.
pretty kind of time, still very much time relevant, kind of time independent
Yeah.
arguments about the whole nature of this construct of a committee and really who ultimately is behind who's making the decisions.
Mm-hmm.
These administrators who outside of their own kind of rooting interests and watching the games don't really have any true
Mm-hmm.
experience like you would in terms of how you would design it to
Yeah.
be. But then obviously there's conflicts of interest if you have people that have. I get the argument. Oh, if you have people that were former coaches or players, well, there's always those biases intertwined there. But it's just like I feel like I kind of sound like that old grumpy family member. Oh well, life isn't fair. I mean, it is what it is, and life's not fair. It's just in any other
Mm-hmm.
99% of other scenarios where it's very to
Mm-hmm.
your point, you win like it is in other pro sports, other college sports. You win, you go undefeated. It's like you got your automatic punch to get
Mm-hmm.
punched. But they've allowed for this to happen within the,
Yes.
the design of the committee.
Although
So
you're describing how it works, which is incredibly dumb. You're right. The fact that they went to a 14 playoff with 5 Power 5 conferences sitting at the table, knowing that all
yeah,
five could have an undefeated champ and they could have to make this decision. They weren't planning on a quarterback getting injured and having to jump a 12
no,
and 1 over a 13 and 0. But from the very beginning, they could have had to leave out a Power 5 undefeated champion because they set up the worst system ever. It's actually not the worst system ever because this is the sport. I saw a very good tweet that said, if you're upset that college football has the dumbest playoff in the world, this is what we signed up for, being fans of the dumbest sport in the world. Um, but this is the sport that used to decide it by just a bunch of guys voting. They didn't even play a championship game. They just voted on who they thought was the best team in the country. They were national champions. Sometimes two teams would get a lot of votes and they'd go, okay, split it. You guys are both national champions. Then
yeah,
they went to the
yeah,
BCS where a secret computer model just chose based on we still don't know who the two best teams in the country were, and they played each other. And now they've gotten to this. Finally, next year there will be some element of fairness. If you win a Power 5 conference, you are guaranteed to get into the playoff.
hmm
But there has never been a fair playoff, or championship game in all of sports. That's what you're describing to us. I agree. I think we all agree. But I want you to stand up for what you were the other day. This is the scenario you wanted. You didn't want Florida State in the college football playoff.
no,
So
no,
say it with your chest.
that's absolutely and I feel like it was the right decision to leave them out. I mean, sorry, Florida State fans, people going out with their pitchforks toward me, but I, it's just it isn't fair, but it is what it is with Florida State. I mean, you talk. There's a lot of talk about the games. Oh well, the games don't matter. The games don't matter. Yeah, they do matter. We saw multiple games played by a handful of teams conference championship weekend and for several weeks leading up to that. And it's just not with the subjective process that it is. You cannot say that Florida State is one of the four best teams, and that's how they've. Well, to your point, how they have said as much. We rank the top four. We put the top 4 best teams in there in the playoff. By that very basic pillar, Florida State, you cannot put that Florida State team in there. And I saw people talk about Twitter, talk about really viral clips and things that have surfaced with Dan Orlovsky. I saw he said, and people are like, ESPN, this is a real ESPN clip and video segment talking about Dan Orlovsky very passionately said, this is not the same Florida State team that went undefeated 2 weeks ago, or getting back, whatever, 2 or 3 weeks ago, with Jordan Travis, effectively. And people were like, basically implying, what is he saying, that they're not an undefeated team? Like, on the surface. Oh, how can you say that? This is like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm in a similar boat. Tend to agree, obviously, with Dan Orlovsky. This Florida State team is completely different. Completely different. And we talk about, look, the most important position in sports, right? Quarterback. And this is another argument that holds true in the NFL. The most overlooked position, underrated at times, is the backup quarterback. And there's some onus where a doomsday scenario, and maybe this is me just being so risk averse, or trying to account for all situations you possibly could. I mean, you gotta have a better backup. You gotta have a better offense in general, and it's just not. And you did what you could. You played what was in front of you, but you had chances. You had, to that point, you had the players. You had the quarterback that was available to you after this injury. A lot of a huge adverse circumstance you have to overcome, and you just did not overcome it and obviously this is all subjective, and you can't really, it's so intangible, and I'm me saying this, it's just my opinion, but you didn't, and the opinion, I guess, how the 10, 12, however large the committee is, saw it as well. You didn't overcome it to the degree of being a top 4 team. You're a top 4 most deserving team, sure, but I didn't really want to see. Like, to your point, you said, fall. Saying on what I was saying with how we previewed it, I didn't want to see Florida State in the playoff, and I think we were all hoping, or a lot of people. I'm not going to speak for everyone. Obviously, I can't do that. I can just speak for myself. Really was hoping for Louisville to win that game, but they didn't. And like I said, I talk about fallen, or not even fallen. I guess Jack Plummer. I just hope for, and again, it's not, to your point, Connor, it's not to belittle the Louisville team. Florida State, their defense, it's championship defense. It's like, it's a very, 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 very poor, for lack of better terms, unfortunate situation for Florida State. And it's tough. It is very tough. It's very tough. I don't want to sound like a drone on here, but.
All right, and now I will take the floor, and I
Please.
will present the argument for Florida State, which I can't believe I'm doing as a Miami fan, but I have to. I have to stand on the side of what's right here. So we'll start with a couple of points that you, and not just you, I see all over Twitter, everyone defending the committee's decision and stuff, have said. One being that, the backup quarterback point. You have to have a good enough backup that if the guy goes down, that, yada, yada, yada. We saw one game of Tabor Adamaker, and his, he got the concussion protocol. So then we saw one game of the third stringer. But Nick Foles, who famously came in as a backup, won the Super Bowl, came in one game and played horrible, was saved by a good defense against the Falcons in the first round of the playoffs there. And then he goes, actually it was the second round because they had to bye. But then he goes, NFC Championship game, looks like Peyton Manning. Super Bowl, looks better than Tom Brady against Tom Brady. Wins a damn Super Bowl. We're judging this whole team on watching one game of a backup quarterback. As if all 4 of the quarterbacks who are in haven't had one bad game this year. Because they all have.
Sure, and that's that's absolutely fair enough. It wasn't. Yeah, it's and like I said, I guess the time, timing is everything in a
Mhm.
way. And if the injury was any point sooner or later, arguably, than when it occurred, you could have had a chance to put a much better foot forward or a product out there if there was more time for
Mhm.
for the next in line quarterback to show that, hey, we're still deserving. Like, we have a serviceable guy, but obviously that wasn't what we saw with our eyes necessarily. But
Mhm.
I guess to that point, Connor, and I guess devil's advocate, my own in a way, point about the quarterback position. I mean, I just would have expected more, honestly, from guys like talk about what made Florida State, obviously with Jordan Travis at the helm, what made them such a dangerous team, and for a large part of the
Mhm.
season. I would have expected in times like these last couple weeks, just expected more from guys like Keon Coleman and Johnny Wilson. I mean, guys that are bona fide, uh, receiving studs. And there was a couple times where Brock Glenn, he throw it up and just ask for your guy to make a play. And there just wasn't enough as a whole in that offense. And Trey Benson, look, he really led them in a comeback effort against Florida,
Mhm.
multiple touchdowns. But just there, even with how bad the quarterback was, I mean, you could have become classic Army Navy football. Run, if you had a good enough
Mhm.
ground game, and if you, like I said, you have enough weapons, guys could have kind of rose to the occasion. But it just was, as a talk about offense. Technically, it's
Mhm.
offense, defense, special teams, 3 units. But
Mhm.
that unit just it just wasn't deserving, and it was timing is everything. It's very unfortunate
No,
again.
you're right. Florida State probably does deserve to be out because those guys didn't rise to the occasion and they lost those two games. Oh, wait, no, they won them both in similar fashion to how Washington barely hung on and nobody rose to the occasion against a bad Arizona State team, or about how Alabama 2 weeks ago needed consecutive miracles, as we said, to beat a 6-6 horrible Auburn team. This is not like judging a team off of who played a 13 game season off of 2 games is totally unfair for Florida, or it's totally fair for Florida State according to a lot of people, but it's totally unfair to do it for other teams that have a couple of bad teams. No, you got to look at the whole body of work. Obviously, there's a material change in those 2 games in the 11 that preceded it for Florida State,
Mm-hmm.
but to me, I just this takes me into my next point. Everyone's saying fine, Florida State got screwed, whatever, but there was no chance they were going to win a game. They were just going to give Michigan a bye as the 4 spot in the, college football playoff.
Mm-hmm.
To which I say, how do you know? This is the reason we all love this sport is that Appalachian State, when they weren't even Division 1, beat a Michigan team, which, by the way, was not one of these horrible Michigan teams. They went 10-2 and won the Rose Bowl that year.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Mm-hmm.
a non FBS team beat them. A Division 1 AA, which is what they called it back in the day, team beat them. There's 1,000 other examples of this throughout the history of the sport that sometimes really bad teams beat really good teams. Florida State isn't even a really bad team. They're still an elite defense. They would have had another month to work with this offense and get everybody on the same page.
Sure.
And to me again, if they had one loss, yeah, it'd be easy. Or if there were 5 undefeated teams, it would be easy to leave them out as the fifth. But to put 2 one-loss teams over them just because a bunch of guys think those teams are better, when you actually play games on the field to see who's better, and they didn't lose one of those games all season, to me it's ridiculous. And to the final point that I will get into, where's the camera? I want to look directly into the camera for this one. You said it. A lot of people have said it. Yeah, it's not fair to Florida State. Guess what? Life isn't fair. How many times have you seen that on Twitter? Everyone's saying it who's supporting this
Mm-hmm.
decision. It's not fair. Guess what? Life isn't fair. You're right. Life is not fair. Life is unpredictable. It's uncontrollable. Things happen that we can't control all the time in life. But is it so wrong to want life to be fair? To want justice and truth to prevail? To want the most deserving team to play in the playoff? Is it so wrong to say that, hey, you're right, life isn't fair, but this is not life, this is a committee of humans who can choose to be fair to a college, saying, Humans should choose to be fair. Life isn't fair. It's not fair that Jordan Travis got hurt, but we could make the fair decision and put the undefeated team in to the college football playoff, or we could just say, life's not fair, screw you guys. And that's what they opted for, and that is what I have a problem with above all else.
Valid points. It's fair enough. I I mean it's I can't say that there's no merit to every word that you've just uttered. It's the college football playoff, the committee allowed for this type of scenario to happen in designing it how it's constructed, and it is terrible, horrendous. It's a to use a term, it's and I think it might have been used in Rick Scott's letter. All these guys, but that have obviously, probably argued on Florida State's behalf already,
Mm-hmm.
used this idea of a miscarriage of justice in how Florida State, you could leave out an undefeated conference champ, but where the committee ultimately comes in here, and I think where they rightfully did, was using the own judgment of who are the top four teams. And to your point, Con, you can it's purely subjective, and there's no way of there's only a way of not knowing by leaving them out
Yeah.
of, well, you play the games have to be played on the field. Like, you can't just in a vacuum. Well, if you're never giving them the chance, you're never going to know how it would have played out. And I guess to that point too, it makes me really interested in thinking of, especially if it was a 1-4, if they remained at number
Mm-hmm.
4 and they played Michigan. It's interesting thinking about just last year. Look at a TCU team that
Nobody gave a chance.
wasn't yeah was and it's interesting. Would you? I feel like on a neutral, if you took that TCU team and played them against this Florida State team, obviously you can't really cross that. It's like that games that just matchups that exist in our mind, and
Yeah.
a matchup that I guess a Michigan Florida State matchup or that exists in the committee's mind, and
Mm-hmm.
obviously they played that out and chose to in their minds, and hence leaving them out. But yeah, it's just a very I Florida State fans have my sympathy, or empathy, but it's I guess I can't really understand what they're going through from a point of experience. But and I don't think, look,
No,
no one
nobody
will.
can outside of
No one
UCF
will.
fans. Maybe Cincinnati fans the first year they got left out and went undefeated, but no Power Five program can understand what they're going through right now. No Power Five program has ever been left out in this situation.
Nope. And look, it just goes back to the idea of, if you had a but then would there ever be a true way to just make it no questions asked, a purely objective? I guess the only way I can think of a purely objective is if you have, but then again, it just would, what I'm thinking of would just, I guess it would be almost like a computer, obviously, like a metric type system. But if you did have an objective way that this could have been done, or how the committee could have been constructed, an objective way of, okay, well, it's just a Power Five world. But then again, there would never be a Cincinnati or anybody
Yeah.
at that point.
Well, I think what they're going to next year is great. They're
Yeah.
guaranteeing that a group of five school will get in. Now, that will still be just this subjective. If there are multiple undefeated, the committee's just going to pick the one they think is the best. But I think there will be obviously less outrage about that, A, because the fan bases are smaller, and B, because no one expects a group of five team to come in and win anything. But I think it's nice that they're included. I think it's fair, and I think every once in a while you do get like a Cincinnati or a UCF that can make some noise. This year you would not. Liberty, I do not believe, is on that level of football team. But if it was 12-team playoff this year, they'd have the chance to prove that they are, which again is fair, because all they can do is play who's on their schedule, and that's what they did, and they didn't lose a single game, which is fair. Now you also get all five Power Five conference champions in, which finally, for the first time in the history of the sport, will make it an actual playoff system where you can play your way in, where you can't go undefeated and have just a room full of guys say, actually, we don't think so. I'm excited for that, and it's almost poetic that they've essentially gotten away with this horrendous system for the last 9 years of it going into this one for the entire life of the college football playoff, where they haven't had to make one of these horribly difficult decisions. Or if they have had to, they're deciding between multiple one-loss teams. They've never had to make one of these decisions with an undefeated team before. It's almost poetic that on the last year of it,
Yep.
they didn't quite get away with it. They thought they were going to get away scot-free for the whole life of the 14 playoff. And the last year, they had to do this and, make enemies with Florida State fans for life.
That they did. And it's just, I just think, I mean, I said it as much. Timing is everything. It was the worst, I think, possible timing for.
Oh, it was a
Florida
total
State.
doomsday scenario.
The worst, yep.
But my point to that is it should have been a doomsday scenario for Alabama. Alabama should be the ones right now crying into a microphone saying, but Vegas power rankings project us as the third best team in the country. How could we be out? And the response to that would be one of fairness and justice, where you could say, you lost a game. They didn't. We put the team that didn't lose the game in.
Yeah, and I get that. I get that argument. It is, again, it sucks for Florida State fans, and we obviously are, I guess, is a phrase, diametrically opposed, or this idea, obviously you're on the side committee made the wrong decision. I think they made the right decision.
And by the way, I want to be clear again. I'm not on the side that Florida State is one of the 4 best teams in the country.
No, yeah, we made that
believe
clear.
that.
Made that clear.
So I don't think they made the wrong decision for what their job is. Their job is to put the 4 best teams in. I think I'm on the side that job is an incredibly stupid one, and we never should have made it part of the sport.
Sure. Yep, and I just in the construct, how terribly, as we talked about, as terribly as it's constructed, this situation allowed for itself to happen, and I think with how they've designed it, I think it was the right decision to leave Florida State out. But all right, a lot said there, Con. Conference weekend in the books. Top 4 no longer a mystery. We got bowl season coming up. We have now the transfer carousel kicking into complete mayhem here. So much going on in the sport. It's beautiful as when the regular season and the initial postseason-ish ends, there's still, and as we have a couple weeks of buffer time, well, there's still so much that's going to go on in between. And
it's one of the most beautiful times of the college football year, as we have still games being played, all the bowls, this and that, and the convergence of all of the off-season stuff that we love to talk about all off-season, with transfer portal and recruiting rankings.
Best
and
reality show.
New head coaches.
Yep.
And, for a few weeks here in December, they all merge at the same time. So, we're going to be, we've got a few very fun episodes coming up. You got anything else?
Stay tuned. Stay tuned for those episodes and some unique and interesting commentary on everything that transpires and in this ever-evolving and changing landscape. With that, Con, who are you? Who am I?
I am a beacon of righteousness and justice and all that is right in the world, and he is a guy with the moral compass of Swiper from Dora. Swiper, no swiping.
I like the map. I think I'm more of a map guy.